room. The reading room. The reading room. The reading room.
This is episode 13, Octopussy.
A 00 agent is found dead, holding a Fabergé egg. The British are suspicious, so they send James Bond to investigate. He discovers there's a connection between not only the priceless egg, but also a smuggling operation and a plot by a renegade Soviet general to detonate an atomic bomb on a US Air Force base. That's the movie in a paragraph. But Jay, what did you remember about it before you rewatched it recently?
This week, Andy, I did remember a few things, and I think this is a given. I remember Octopussy. You know, it says it in its name. I remember that James Bond was a clown, and I don't think many people can forget that James Bond was a clown, because I don't think there's any other times in the franchise where he's dressed up as a clown. I also remembered that there was a circus, hence why James Bond is dressed as a clown, and he's not just randomly dressed as a clown as one of his disguises. And Andy, I did remember, but I didn't write this down on the notes, so I'm kind of, putting this on you now. I remembered that there was a knife thrower, but I didn't remember that there was twins. So I did remember that. So it's a bit more than last week's episode where, I said for your eyes only, I didn't remember anything. So I did remember a bit more. And I think this film was on TV a lot when I was a kid. So I think that's probably helped me in terms of remembering certain aspects of Octopussy. What about you?
So like last week, I didn't remember a single thing. And I wonder if this is because, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, the Moonraker film was really disappointing to me, and that's where I thought the silliness and the cheesiness went overboard. And I wonder if this kind of almost put me off the franchise for a little while. So the other Roger Moore films I've seen fewer times. I've definitely seen this before, because I've seen them all before multiple times, but nothing came to mind.
I think as well, I think we've said this before, I'm 41 now, so as a kid growing up in the 80s, I remember Roger Moore films being on TV more, whereas I do remember Sean Connery films, but I think they were less frequent. So, we're obviously in the UK, so James Bond films tended to be on during like holidays, breaks, like Easter, Christmas. And I do recall, because it's the 80s and I was growing up in the 90s, there seemed to be more times that Roger Moore films were on.
I remember, and I've probably spoken about this before, but I remember a time when all the Bond films were played in order, one per week, and it was a big deal at school because there was a few of us watching them and then talking about it in the playground the next day. But I don't necessarily remember random Bond films in any particular frequency or volume. But I mean, it's still to this day. You get the occasional Bond film on TV. Even now, Amazon Prime have bought the rights to them all. They're still being shown, usually on ITV, on a fairly regular basis, has to be said.
And Andy, why you mentioned Amazon Prime, I don't think I've mentioned this to you. I watched Octopussy instead of watching it on DVD. So I didn't watch the box set like we've been doing each week. I actually watched it on Prime, and I found it loads easier to navigate and pause. I think I've said in the previous episode, I don't have a DVD player, so I watch it on the Xbox and trying to pause it with a controller, then fast forward and rewind certain bits of, when we're recording bits. In terms of writing the notes, it's more clunky to do on the Xbox, whereas on Amazon Prime, it was just like, just press the pause button. It was just so much more streamlined. Did you watch it on Prime, or did you watch it on your Blu-ray DVD?
Blu-ray on the PS4, which, again, with using the controls is a bit tricky because I always forget which button's which. And or I'll put the controller on the floor, but accidentally press the rewind or fast forward button and it goes 10 times speed. So there's a few times I've done that. And also PS4 is not the most recent one. I need to get with the times, really. PS4 is well outdated now, isn't it?
It is, but good luck trying to get a PS5. I don't know what the stock levels are like.
I'll wait for the PS6 to be released, and then PS5 will be down in price. That'll be what I do. But let's not turn this into a gaming podcast. Let's move on. We'll get some information as we do each week. So let's start with the villains. There's quite a few in this. We've got Prince Kamal Khan. We've got General Orlov. We've got Gobinda, Octopussy, Magda, and the aforementioned twins Mishka and Grishka. And we've got 3 Bond girls, 2 of the names we've heard already, Octopussy and Magda, and a 3rd Bond girl being Bianca.
Yeah, and the theme song in Octopussy was All Time High by Rita Coolidge. The opening credits, so this one I thought was slightly different, Andy. So we had some neon projections of 007 on screen. We also had the models being shot out of the gun. We had guns shooting out lasers as well. Then your usual naked models, jumping models, and the reoccurring theme with the last few films. Roger Moore is in the opening credits, but it's a couple of still images this time round. So body count is one of the areas, Andy, I do look forward to kind of recording and monitoring in this podcast series. So in Octopussy, James Bond got 15 kills, which isn't bad. And obviously we can look at how that compares later on in the show.
Yeah, that feels like a decent number. Another thing we're tracking is gadgets. We've got a few in this one. We've got the false bottom bomb case. We've got the Bead BD5 jet, and we have a TV watch. James Bond introduces himself as such at the 31-minute, 24-second mark. And an interesting note at this point is, so far, Roger Moore has said this in every Bond film that he's been in, whereas Sean Connery only said it in 50% of his films, which I find quite an interesting stat. We have a martini in the film. We have a hat. It's worn but not thrown. But Jay, one question I do have for you is, what was your favourite scene?
Yeah, I struggle with this one, Andy, if I'm being honest. So I've cheated. So instead of picking one scene, I picked 2 scenes. And the 2 scenes I picked is when Bond escapes from his locked room at Kamal's place, and then he basically breaks out of his room. He then shimmies on the the balcony, the out bit of the building. I can't think what you call it. And then he makes his way down into the basement, and he listens to Kamal's and Orlov's conversation. That reminds me, Andy, where you're talking about the PS4, and I know you said, we don't want to make this into a gaming podcast, but that whole scene just felt like a computer game, in terms of you're controlling a character, and you got to shimmy around, making sure, like a stealthy game, something like Hitman or something. That did bring back memory. Well, when I saw that, I thought, it's like playing a game, that, or observing.
That's an interesting take. I'd not thought of it like that, but now I recall, I think you've pretty much nailed it.
Yeah, and the other one I did enjoy is the rooftop train fight sequence. So this is where he's fighting Gobinda, and I can't remember, Andy, I'm going to have to hold my hands up here. I can't remember if it's Mishka or Grishka. So it's one of the twins. And there's an intense fight, and there's a number of different components to the fight in terms of the whole train bit. It did remind me, and the missus said this as well when it happened. She said it was like that fight scene that we had before, and she obviously couldn't remember the film, but it was the one, from Russia with Love with Red Grant. Even though it wasn't on the top, it was, there was a fight scene, and obviously in the train. And obviously, Andy, we've had a fight scene in Live and Let Die, haven't we, with T.H. Johnson, at the end when Bond is with Solitaire in their little compartment.
Indeed, Bond loves a train fight. There's a couple, and I don't think this will be the last one necessarily.
No, he might like
more to come in future episodes.
He might like a train fight, but do the train operators like him? But there's a bit of damage, insurance claims on there, pushing up their premiums.
Future Bond films will be replacement bus fights because of the damage caused to to Bond Railways.
But yeah, so they're my two favourite scenes, Andy. What about you? What did you pick?
Two good scenes there, Jay. I liked both of them quite a lot, but the one that just pipped it for me was before the opening credits, and I won't go into great detail now because obviously that'll be one of the first talking points. But essentially, it was the way Bond was arrested and then escaped via the plane, the Bede BD-5 jet, which was hidden in the horse's arse. We'll get there, but I liked the whole sequence. There was some good action, a little bit of silliness, but generally a really good, strong start to the film, I thought. So that scene pipped it for me.
So Andy, when I read your notes on that, it reminded me of a previous episode where your favourite scene, and I can't remember which one it was. Was it Jaws' parachute one, where your favourite scene was basically the beginning. So without giving much, before we get to the rating, is that an indication in terms of the rest of the film wasn't great, or is it just that one was the better one of many good scenes?
I think the latter. The scene you're referring to from Moonraker with the parachute fight, the mid-air fight, that was the edge of the cliff and then it fell off. Whereas this was, it went, started strong but stayed strong, I would say.
Oh yeah, sorry for bringing back memories of Moonraker, Andy.
Yeah, that's okay. I thought we'd moved on, but clearly you're clinging on to the past. Speaking of clinging on, were you clinging on to your phone during this film? How many times did you reach for your phone whilst watching this?
Yeah, I remember, not gloating, Andy, but the last few weeks, I've said I've done zero looking on my phone. I've been really disciplined. But this week, I must admit, I did look at my phone once, and it wasn't anything to do with James Bond. I wasn't not enjoying the film. It's purely because we watched this on a night that had some boxing, and I wanted to check when the fight was happening, and I couldn't remember if I was looking at the undercard, knowing that the main event was starting in a few hours, or I was checking roughly what time it was. But basically, yeah, I jumped onto Twitter for a few minutes because it was Tyson Fury fight, and I thought, oh, and then that was it. So I didn't pause the film, so I might have missed something when that was happening. So I do have to hold my hands up. I wasn't being a good boy in terms of what I usually do in terms of being focused. But yeah, I did. It just came out of the blue. I thought, oh, Tyson Fury's fighting tonight. What time's that? So I quickly jumped on my phone. What about you, Andy? Have you been disciplined again, or were you searching on various things about? Last week, I think you were searching about Bond, wasn't you, on your phone?
I was searching about age differences between Bond and the Bond girls, but this time round, I was Mr. Discipline himself. 0 times, watched it through without any interruption. So I'm quite pleased with myself. Pat on the back for me there. We are, of course, on the rating room. Speaking of ratings, what was your all-important rating this week, Jay?
I gave it a solid 6. And I did struggle with this, Andy. We're going to go into a bit more depth later on. But 6 out of 10, I think, is a fair score for Octopussy. What about you?
I also went with a 6 out of 10. I would say strong but not spectacular. That would be my line on the poster to describe the film. When you get the quotes from the critics. It'd be Andrew Brewer, whatever publication, Andrew Brewer, The Rating Room, 6 out of 10, strong but not spectacular.
I thought you meant then you were, as in you're actually promoting the film. I mean,
you wouldn't want to promote something if it was 6 out of 10, would you? You'd say 10, but no, as a critic, and I guess we could say we are fully qualified critics now. We've done more than a dozen podcasts. Probably more qualified than many podcasters out there. You know who you are. So I'm comfortable that I can take that critic hat and give it a solid 6 out of 10, and people will believe what I say.
Andy, I know we're digressing here, but when you mention about the critics and having it on, say, the movie poster and DVDs, Ricky Gervais, when he releases his DVDs, he includes a couple of negative comments on there. I think it's a Daily Mail and another one which basically just always give him negative ones. So he always puts on like 1 out of 5 stars and whatever the little quote is. Just a little tidbit there.
It's a nice way of advertising, yeah. No such thing as bad press. But anyway, that's what we think. More importantly, what did your wife think of this one?
Yeah, so Andy, I'm going to hold my hand up again, because I said to the missus, the last few comments have been similar. So you've got to go away and think about it. So we watched it, and then she thought about it overnight, and then basically spent all day, and I kept harassing her saying, Mrs., I need your comments. And she, yeah, I won't forget it. And basically, Andy, I typed up all the notes, just about to send them to you. And then she came and like tapped me on the shoulder and said, this is what I think. So she said, one of the better Bonds and more realistic than the others, although there were some bits that were unrealistic. I did point out some of those, and she said, yes, that's what I meant in terms of unrealistic. And I can't remember what they were. She says the more films are more comedy filled with one-liners, which I think is a fair comment. When having rewatched up to, film 13, when you think about Moore, Connery and Lazenby, I think Moore is definitely filled with more one-liners compared to the other actors that we've seen so far. And she also said, I've banged on about this a few times, and she keeps saying to me, can't wait till Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan films, especially Pierce Brosnan. But she was saying the Roger Moore films are more comedy, whereas the Daniel Craig movies are more action/thrillers. So it's a bit different, because she usually bangs on about Pierce Brosnan. I think she's got a soft spot for Pierce Brosnan. And so that was her comment this week, which I was a bit surprised when she said this was one of the better Bonds, because our 6 out of 10s would say otherwise.
Yeah, I think some very fair points made. Definitely a lot of comedy in this film, I thought. But there was a lot of realism, so I completely agree with that. A few more facts about the film. So the runtime for this was 2 hours, 11 minutes. Slightly longer than what we've seen previously. I've mentioned before that there seems to be something of a consistent nature of the Moore films, all within a very strict window. This extends it just so slightly, but still not too far away. Released in 1983, so we're over 20 years into the Bond movie franchise now. And John Glenn is back. He returns after directing For Your Eyes Only.
Yeah, and just some general points before we start getting into the actual film. So, as I say each week, I like to kick off with the budget and the box office stats. So this is the largest budget to date at $36 million. So that's an increase of $5 million compared to Moonraker, which previously had the largest budget, the big sci-fi blockbuster there, and roughly $9 million more than the previous film, For Your Eyes Only. So again, Andy, we're seeing that trend of, putting more and more money into the production cost for James Bond. Yeah, so in terms of box office stats, it took $187.5 million. So when you adjust it for inflation, that's $541.2 million. So at the time, this had the third highest worldwide box office performance for the James Bond films. And when you adjust that for inflation, that's actually the lowest performance. Also, Andy, I don't know why I picked this out. I just thought it was really noticeable in terms of the film, that this film, so this is for you animal lovers out there, this film features the most animals in the franchise so far. So we've got a cobra, we've got cows, a bull, a camel, we've got a blue-ringed octopus, there's a tiger, there's spiders, elephants, a snake, a leech, a crocodile, and at least, there's a horse at the end, but obviously you see horses at the beginning as well in Andy's favorite scene, the whole bit with the horse racing. So I noticed that, and that's why I wanted to put in a little comment there, Andy, to say there's lots of animals in there. It's like a Dr. Dolittle does James Bond.
Yeah, that would be a good crossover from our previous episode, Dr. Dolittle versus James Bond. I thought of a pun there that leads into next week's film. With that many animals, the next film could be called From a Zoo to a Kill. Anyway, tumbleweed sound effects playing at this point. So the title of the film comes from a short story where Bond is assigned by the British Secret Service to apprehend an octopus-loving British officer who's implicated in a murder, and it's related to illegally obtained Nazi gold. Bond gives the officer the option of committing suicide, and the film makes direct reference to the events of the story by revealing that Octopussy's father was the villain of the short story. I believe, I've not wrote the notes down here, but I believe the story is called Octopussy and the Living Daylights, if memory serves correctly. So yeah, the one title goes into two title films, which will one of which we'll see in a few weeks' time. And another little tidbit: at the end of the film, the credits announce that the next Bond film will be From a View to a Kill, but the actual title was changed to just A View to a Kill right before filming began. And interestingly, this film is the last time that the next Bond film is announced by title in the end credits.
The Rain Room.
Okay, so this next bit is the goofs and continuity errors. So in the balloon scene, where it seems like Q can circle around and land on a spot where he flew past previously, a balloon can only fly in the direction of the wind. So that's a bit of a goof. At the end of the film, Bond chases Khan following the battle at Octopussy's mansion. In the short time it takes to run to a nearby plane, it turns from pitch dark to bright sunshine, which, Andy, I'm sure I mentioned last week's episode or the episode before about some films being like that, where, you know, they have a daylight scene and it's gone to night or vice versa. So I think that's a nice little link in from the previous episode.
Yeah, that was probably the most blatant usage of daylight and lack thereof. So that was really quite a big error for me. One thing that I noticed, and I know you made notes of as well, is when Bond is on the roof of the train and then he jumps in through the roof panel. He jumps down into the car and he puts on a gorilla suit to hide. And he's hiding from one of the knife throwers, either Mishka or Grishka, who's in a very small car with him. Surely he would have heard something, not only from the fact that the roof panel is open so you can hear all the atmosphere outside, but also the noise of the panel itself and the extra air that was being blown in. So there's so many things that would have and should have made Mishka or Grishka aware that something was happening, but nothing did. And he managed to put on a gorilla suit in that time and take it off later on as well, which we'll get into that scene in a little bit. But a lot happens without him being noticed where he should definitely have been noticed. So that was a little bit out of context, I would say. And one final thing, and this is something that maybe not everyone would have picked up on. Certainly I didn't pick up on. I think this is one from your notes. Bond is with Q and he says to him, "I've lost my PPK." However, throughout the film he's carrying a Walther P5 and continues to use that later on. There is no PPK in this film, even though that is usually Bond's gun of choice. So that was a little bit of a continuity error there for any gun aficionados that may have noticed.
The Rain Room.
Yeah, so they're the continuity or goose that we've picked up this week. So jumping into the opening scene now, and I'm going to kick off with the gun barrel. So the last few weeks I've obviously mentioned that in the Roger Moore films, we see the background tint slightly changes between films. So in Octopussy, it's actually reverted back to the Moonraker buff, which, as I stated in the Moonraker episode, is a brownish yellow. that I had to Google. So we're going straight into the horse race scene now. So interestingly, Andy, I can't remember if I made a note on this. This is another intro that has no linkage to the main storyline in the actual film, does it? It's a cold opening.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't realize it at the time, but now you mention it, yeah, there's no need for this scene to be in terms of the context of the overall film.
Definitely. And the film opens up with a scene at the horse race. So I think it's a horse race, but there's obviously military around. And Bond is in disguise. He's in disguise a few times in this film. And he's in disguise as a horse owner / trainer. I wasn't quite sure whether he's a trainer or an owner. But the note I've made, because obviously he did a bit of dress up in last week's episode, is he's not dressed up as a friar this time. So he's gone military / horse trainer / owner.
Yeah, this is where Bond starts one of his many disguises. The very first note that I wrote when the opening scene started was that you've got Bond in a brown jacket, driving a brown car, towing a brown horse box trailer, which is carrying a brown horse. Just brown everywhere.
That is a good observation, Andy. And just another thought that occurred to me. I'm not into horse racing, but this opening scene is set in Cuba based on the research I've done. Looking at the outfit he's wearing, it's very British. I don't know what horse owners / trainers wear across the globe, but that's a very British style.
I would agree. I don't know the Cuban horse racing scene particularly well, has to be said, but he does look like your typical English country gentleman when he first arrives.
Let's move on. Well, I can't move on fully because the next notes we've made is Bond's clothes are reversible. So he's changed from the all brown outfit that Angie's just picked out into an army officer uniform. And the thing that we picked up was he reverses his flat cap, but you can tell on screen when he reverses it, it's because it's a flat cap, the fabric is all loose. But then then when the camera switches to another bit and it comes back and he's actually got it on his head, it's rigid, like an actual, I'm not sure what they called, Andy, the army officer's hat. But did you notice that in terms of the style?
I did, yeah. It's blatantly a different hat. But speaking of army, there was what I'm assuming was an army general in the crowd watching the horses go by, and he's got a pretty lady stood next to him, and he just blatantly stares at her chest. And there's no attempt to cover this up, not very subtle at all, just blatantly staring at her chest, which, I don't know, it's uncomfortable. You know, you've got to treat women with more respect than that.
Interesting, Andy, because I wonder whether he was doing, if he was helping you out with nipple watch and he was just keeping an eye out there, because I didn't notice that, if I'm being honest, but maybe he's one of your minions helping out with any kind of nipple slips or nipple watches.
Could be, but you got to not be so blatant. We're going down a path that we don't want to go down, but yeah, you can't just stare at a woman's chest like that. It's out of order.
No, we don't want to be talking about this because my wife listens to these episodes as well. So let's move on.
Yeah, let's edit that bit.
So Bond disguise includes a moustache, which is this the first time, Andy, that Bond uses a facial hair prop? Because when Bianca put it on, which I don't think you know it's Bianca now, her name. I can't remember her name's mentioned before, but it is Bianca. She sticks it on. She helps Bond stick it on. And I thought Roger Moore looked very different with the moustache. And that made me think, has Bond had a facial hair prop before?
I'm not sure that he has. Now, the first thing that came to mind was You Only Live Twice, where Bond became an authentic Japanese man, he says in air quotes. But I don't think there was any facial hair element to it. I think it was just a wig. rather than a moustache and or beard. So I think you're right with this one.
Yeah, I'm just thinking now you mention that, does he do something with his eyebrows in that film, Sean Connery? I would look at Google, but
He might have new eyebrows, yeah. I don't know if he's got like some sort of prosthetic eyebrows.
yeah.
I think you're right. But this is the first moustache, I would say. Unless any listeners out there can find other instances, I'm going with this is Bond's first moustache. So it's at this point he's got a fake ID, and sees the name on it is for Colonel Toro, and Bond at this point says, "Toro sounds like a load of bull," which I thought was a nice little line. For those Italian speakers, will know that Toro is the Italian word for bull. The real Colonel Toro appears soon after, just as Bond is finishing fitting a bomb to the plane. Bond is captured, he's transported away from the hangar, and then this is the scene I referred to earlier. This is my favourite scene where Bond comes to the rescue and he eventually escapes. And Bianca shows quite a lot of leg and quite a lot of side boob to distract the guards on the truck. Now, this is where Nipple Watch went into full effect, but Bianca did a great job of keeping everything covered up. Yeah, but there was still plenty of skin on display to distract the guards on the truck.
Yeah, when that scene happened, I was like that, and I said to the missus, "Oh, that's a nice little view there." But then, Andy, Tina Hudson, who plays Bianca, was only 17 when she appeared in Octopussy. So, based on my research, and I really struggled with this, Andy, because I was looking at various James Bond forums, fan sites, IMDb. I think this is her only action appearance. So, she's on Octopussy, then that's it. First 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a tops, she appears in James Bond, and then she's kind of done something different. But that was a very sexy scene.
It seems to be a one and done for Tina. I was very surprised to find out she was only 17. I thought she looked a lot older in the film. But I guess 17-year-olds in the 80s are very different to the 17-year-olds of today.
This is a question to you, Andy, and this is a question to the listeners. So, as Andy says, Bond is captured, he's being transported away, and Bianca comes, and Bianca is, showing some leg side boobs to distract the guards. Bond pulls the parachute calls on the guards while they're distracted by Bianca. My question, Andy, is why are the guards wearing parachutes in the truck?
And my answer is I have no earthly idea. That makes no sense.
It just seemed, it was just weird that, because like when that happened, me and the missus just like looked at each other and it's like, why are they wearing parachutes? It just seemed it seemed like a prop that the writers put in just so they could do that scene.
Yeah, surely the only time you would put a parachute on is as you enter a plane. Because this would suggest that the guards wear parachutes at all times, just in case they're needed on the ground, which makes no sense. So whilst it made for an amusing visual for a film, absolutely not realistic in any way.
Yeah, I agree. And I've got another question, Andy. So Bond escapes by using the BD5 that is hidden in a horse trailer and is concealed by a fake horse's rear. I want to know, how did the BD5 fit in the trailer? Because when the BD5 comes out, the microplane or microjet, even though the wings fold, it looks too long to go in the actual trailer. Did you notice that, or do you think realistically it could have fitted in? But I just thought the trailer is obviously a bit longer than a normal horse. It would have probably, I don't know, never been in a horse trailer. I'm guessing it has a bit at the front where the hay is. But that plane, when it rolled out of the trailer, it just looked like it was too long.
It did to me as well. I don't know I don't know whether they've taken some artistic license there. I would say it brought me back to an earlier Bond film where Sean Connery flies Little Nelly, I believe the plane's called, which is kind of a do-it-yourself plane kit type thing. But we see that has to be fixed. It's not in one piece and then unfolds, whereas this is in one piece and the wings unfold, so that kind of buys you a little bit of space. But yeah, it didn't seem right to me. But who knows? Let's talk about the BD-5 a little bit, shall we? So it's invented by Jim Bead, made its first flight in 1971. It's a microjet made to be easy to fly and build yourself, and it came in kit form and was on sale for $1,950. Top speed of 215 miles an hour. There were numerous problems, construction problems, engine problems, financial problems, and the company filed for bankruptcy in 1979, just 8 years later. The production crew made several alterations to the original to make this film version. And what was interesting is that the original mock-ups were ordered for Moonraker, but because of budget problems, they shelved it until this film.
So originally I wrote that the BD-5 looked too flimsy. So the whole scene that you liked, you know, where it's being chased and it's going at high speeds, and it's doing a really good chase sequence. I thought the plane looked too flimsy to be flying at those speeds, but obviously based on our research, the plane could actually do 215 miles per hour. So I think I have to hold my hands up there and stand corrected based on the research that we've done. So I just wanted to kind of make that comment and let people know that, I thought it was flimsy, but I stand corrected.
You are only human, Jay, after all. There was just kind of finish this scene off. So Bond, as he flies away, he lands the plane on a road, and the plane comes to a stop next to a petrol station, and the attendant there is sat waiting, and Bond just says, "Fill her up, please," which I thought was a nice little quip, and one of many in this film. I noted we'll get into some later on, but I thought there was quite a lot of one-liners and silly little lines, and this was one of many that we saw throughout the film. From here we go into the title sequence music. So this is the second theme song to not share the name with the title of the film. So we had Nobody Does It Better for The Spy Who Loved Me, and now we have All Time High for Octopussy.
Yeah, and the song was written by Tim Rice. So Rice had worked in musical theatre before this, and this was actually his first film or TV work. But Rice went on to work on a number of different songs, especially in Disney films. So that included Aladdin, The Lion King, and The Beauty and the Beast. Octopussy sees a return on the franchise regular John Barry. So he's obviously over his tax issues that has stopped him doing the previous film. And this is Barry's 9th Bond out of the 13 so far. So he's had quite a good innings. And obviously we're going to research future episodes, and I don't know how many more he does, because I thought he did a fair chunk. So when we've been rewatching these, Andy, I was surprised that he hadn't done 4 of the 13 so far. I thought he basically did everything up until a certain point, and then that was it. So I was quite surprised, based on the research that we're doing, that he didn't do all of them, but obviously he's done the majority of them.
Yeah, I'm surprised the number's only 9 at this stage. So it'll be interesting to see at what point he bows out of the franchise, and what his final tally is. So the song All Time High spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the US Adult Contemporary Singles Chart and reached number 36 on the Billboard Hot 100. And from there, we move into the film proper. So we start in East Berlin. We're at a circus. We see a clown being chased from the circus by a knife thrower. Only it turns out there are 2 knife throwers. These are the twins, Mishka and Grishka. Now, there's a bit in the film which is before the revelation that the knife throwers are actually twins, where you see one of them in the distance, and then all of a sudden, one is next to the clown. I believe your wife was very surprised by this revelation.
Yeah, so when that happened, before you obviously saw the one in the distance, he turns near the tree, and the knife throws there, and the missus turned to me saying, "How did he get there?" So she's ready to jump on any kind of fault. And then I explained, there's actually twins. Sorry, love, I'll give you a spoiler. And then pretty much the next shot is revealed that there's twins. So the clown is stabbed in the back by the knife throwers, and then he falls into the water. We see then slightly later on that he stumbles into the British embassy, and he's got a Fabergé egg. So he kind of falls on the floor, and his hand opens up, and the Fabergé egg kind of just like is there, which then cuts to the scene in MI6. So we see Bond enter Miss Moneypenny's office, and he makes a comment about how beautiful she is. But it actually turns out to be Penelope Smallbone. So Miss Smallbone was originally considered as a recurring character that would eventually take over Lois Maxwell when she left her role as Miss Moneypenny. However, Miss Smallbone only appeared briefly in Octopussy and was never seen again. So I thought that was interesting there. And also another comment I made here, Andy, was Bond gives Moneypenny one rose, and then he gives the rest of the bunch to Smallbone. So I thought that was a bit harsh on the aging Moneypenny there. So I wondered, did Bond do this just as a bit of flirting, or a bit of bants, or was he just trying to work his magic on Miss Smallbone?
Potentially all of the above, I would say. But probably trying to work his magic. But yeah, it feels a bit ageist towards Moneypenny. Considering, she's been with Bond from the start pretty much. They're going to be about the same age. One question I did have, and I didn't write this down, and maybe this is a rhetorical question, I don't know, but why does Moneypenny need an assistant?
Maybe, I'm going to say maybe Miss Smallbone is a YTS, but she looks a bit older than a YTS.
Maybe, but as we saw earlier, Bianca is only 17 in real life, but maybe not 17 in the film. But anyway, so this is where we're normally treated to a hat throw, and we see that Bond has hat in hand, but because of the earlier distraction, he just places it on the rack, so we can't count this as a hat throw this time round. We are introduced to M at this point, a new M, played by Robert Brown. So we'd previously seen Robert Brown as Admiral Hargreaves in The Spy Who Loved Me. What we don't know, or is not clear, is whether Robert Brown is intended to play the same character when he portrays M in Octopussy and later Bond films. So the title of M is not necessarily given to a specific person; it is a role. So is he M as in a new M, or is he M as in a continuation of the previous M? I don't know.
Or is he still Admiral Hargreaves, but he's just been designated?
Yeah, you've said that much better than I did. Yeah, is he still Admiral Hargreaves designated as M, or is he now a new character? I guess we may or may not find out. But he goes on to appear in a further 3 Bond films before he's replaced by Dame Judi Dench in GoldenEye. So Bond at this stage demonstrates his knowledge of Fabergé eggs. He's told about the death of 009 and goes into great detail, just like he goes into great detail about various other subjects in previous films, like butterflies and alcohol, etc.
He is well versed, isn't he, in various things. We now see a scene in Russia. So we've got the leaders of the Soviet army, and they're discussing various options. So we get the reappearance of General Gogol. So I like seeing General Gogol. He's obviously been in a few films now, and he's very much the voice of reason in Octopussy. Whereas we're introduced to General Orlov, who's new in Octopussy, and we've not seen him before in the Bond franchise. And he seems to be very much the polar opposite of General Gogol.
Yeah, he's very vocal, very aggressive. And it plays out in when he presents a plan, which is a much more aggressive plan, which involves a scenario where the Soviet Union invades Europe. So he's got different ideas to General Gogol, that's for sure.
And this whole scene just kind of made me think of what's happening now you know, in the whole scene of Ukraine and Russia. But also one thing the wife picked up was, Andy, and I didn't make this note here, was, you know, when General Orlov is doing his presentation about invading Germany, and he's got on his, I know it's not PowerPoint, but he's got on his slideshow with all these nice little tanks lined up on the European border. And he's saying, oh, you know, we do this, we can invade Germany in X days and do all this. And then when they basically tell him, no, we're not doing that, he kind of just like then slops down on his seat. He just came across as like a moody teenager. It brought back memories of Kevin and Perry, you know, Harry Enfield,
Yes.
the whole stroppiness.
Petulant teenagers.
That's yeah. So English actor Stephen Burkoff plays General Orlov. So I was surprised actually that Stephen Burkoff was English, because he does tend to feature and play villains. And from memory in these roles, he don't tend to play English villains. He was in The Craze, but he's been in Rambo First Blood Part 2. He's been in Beverly Hills Cop. And he also played Adolf Hitler in the TV miniseries War and Remembrance.
Very versatile actor with his range of portrayals there. We move away from Russia. We're back in London. We're at Sotheby's this time. So Bond has got Jim Fanning with him, and they're attending the auction because the Fabergé eggs have been turning up lately. There's an egg on sale in this particular auction, and Fanning tells Bond that the egg is estimated at between £250,000 and £300,000.
Yeah, and then we notice we notice that Bond notices that an attractive lady has entered the auction, and Fanning makes a quip about staying focused on the mission. And then Fanning states that it's unusual for Kamal Khan to bid, as he's usually a seller. So I think that should start setting some kind of alarm bells. We also see them Bond making a bid of $425,000 for the egg. Bond then asks us to view the egg and switches it. And I thought that just seemed so obvious. And I also wondered, how realistic is that in terms of auctions? You know, because from memory, they're in like a U-shaped table setup. Is it U-shaped, or is it two banks of rows? And then the person, you know, one of the assistants, I don't know what you call him in terms of the showroom, comes over to him with it on a pillow, and then he just scoops it up. And I was thinking, well, surely you can't just pick up something like valuable like that, because what happens if he drops it? But you could tell he's got like a pamphlet, hasn't he, on his lap or something, and you could see that he makes that switch. I just thought it was so obvious there. So when you have that reveal later on to say that he switched it, it wasn't a surprise.
Yeah, I agree. Very obvious. And you're right about the etiquette of handling the items for sale. I would think at the very, very least, for something as valuable and as precious as that, they would be made to wear gloves when handling such things. But I think the more likely option would be you're not allowed to handle the merchandise until you buy it. But it's at this point, you mentioned the bid of 425,000, and Fanning is visibly sweating, and he's anxious because Bond is playing a very dangerous game here by trying to up the price. But it works. The egg is finally sold for £500,000, and when Bond gets back to M's not particularly happy about Bond's antics, and he orders him to travel to Delhi.
So we arrive in India, and we see a helicopter on water. So when I watched this, I just had a little chuckle to myself, because it brought back memories. And last week's episode, Andy was talking about whether it's a plane boat or a boat plane, and we had a very brief discussion about that. Well, I did a bit of research on this, but before I tell you my research, Andy, I was chuckling to myself when this happened. And then the missus said, "What are you laughing at?" I said, "Oh, it's like last week there was a plane that landed on water." And me and Andy were saying, "Is it a plane boat or a boat water?" And she just turned around and she went, "What, you mean a seaplane?" And I went, "Yeah." Me and Andy couldn't remember what it was. And she just listed it straight away. So
Seaplane, of course.
It's so obvious. Anyway, so the helicopter that lands on water, and land is called an amphibious helicopter. So I thought that would probably be what a seaplane is, but a seaplane is called a seaplane. So the listeners probably realise how stupid we are, Andy, already. I think
It's not
13
called a sea helicopter
No.
or a seacopter.
Yeah.
I could rename this, or is it is it a boat helicopter or a helicopter boat?
Indeed. But I think 13 episodes in, I think the audience know what kind of level of intelligence we are. So it just, well, actually, I don't want to say it surprised me that the missus knew that, but the fact is that she just turned around and just was like, what you mean seaplane? Just made me feel a bit dumb there. So that was my comment there. But I did have a little laugh because I thought it was so relevant to literally the last episode we did. And then we see in this scene, as soon as Bond arrives in Delhi, he's on a special helicopter. Anyway, Bond meets VJ, who is playing the James Bond theme. So I thought that was a nice little nod there. And VJ is posing as a snake charmer. And when they leave, VJ kind of just discards the snake and states that he hates snakes.
Yeah, he's not the only one. They creep me out, but it really freaked me out the way he just kind of threw it into not thrown it into the crowd, but he just let it go into a crowd of people. Yeah, kind of gave me the shivers, that scene. VJ is played by a professional tennis player, Vijay Amrit Raj, which probably explains later on why he's using a tennis racket as a weapon in the tuk-tuk chase. Now, VJ is quite an accomplished tennis player. VJ, the real VJ, not the VJ in the film. He got to the quarterfinals of Wimbledon and the US Open singles on 4 occasions in total, and also got to the semi-finals of Wimbledon in the doubles. So that's a pretty impressive tennis record he's got there.
It is very good. And Andy, I didn't make a note on this, but I did research it. Apparently, VJ hates snakes in real life as well. So when he kind of threw it away, I think that was actually in real life. He wanted to get rid of it as quickly as possible as well.
Bond arrives at the hotel to check in, and I like this part because the hotel clerk says, "We've been expecting you," and that immediately made me think of Blofeld. And also it made me think of Dr. No, where the boat pulls up on the island and when he's captured with Honey Rider and they say, "We've been expecting you," or something, some words to that effect. So this is a reoccurring line throughout the franchise.
Yeah, that's a good pickup, Andy. Yeah, that's the bit on Dr. No with the dragon, isn't it? Or is it the boat, did you say?
It's the boat. When the boat's kind of calling to shore, and Bond and Honey Rider are hidden in the undergrowth near the beach.
Yeah.
And they shout something like, "He's been expecting you," or "We've been expecting you," something along those lines.
That is a good pickup, Andy, in terms of the Blofeld and Dr. No. So at the hotel casino, as we said before, Bond loves a little go in the casino. We see Kamal Khan playing backgammon, which I think is the first time we've seen backgammon so far in the franchise. And
I think it is, yeah, because normally it's card games he's playing.
Yeah, so there's no shoe in this scene. So we've got backgammon, and he's playing with Major Clive, and we see Bond then flirts with Magda at the bar, which I don't think we know her name yet, do we? I think he's just flirting. She's the mysterious blonde that was at the auction house with Kamal Khan. So I don't think he knows her name here.
I agree. Yep, that's correct.
So back at the backgammon table, the Major doesn't risk Kamal's offer to increase the stakes. So Bond has been observing Kamal, and he steps in, but loses that round. So then Bond then gambles again, but this time he picks up Kamal's dice in the little cup fin, and then he basically knows that they're loaded. So he takes that stake and rolls the 6 that he needs, or is it 12? Is it 2 6s?
It's a double six, yeah.
Yeah. So he rolls the 2 6s. So I thought that was nice because you saw him, didn't you, at the beginning of that scene? He's observing him, and you notice Kamal Khan. He kind of put his hand, didn't he, down to the right, away from the table, and you see Bond clock that. So I don't know. That's where he was switching the dice, or that's where he obviously expected. That's how he was like, doing the rigging.
Yeah, Bond knows something's afoot and picks up on it straight away. I've not noted this down, but there's that scene. There was something in there that I thought was quite clever, and that's when Bond. I think he says something like, "I'm going to use player's privilege," and then takes the dice, and then he rolls them, and looks directly at Khan and says something like, "Oh, look, double six," but he never actually looks at the dice because he knows what they're going to be. So that's how he wins that particular hand, obviously much to Kamal's chagrin. And at this point, Kamal's henchman, who goes by the name Gobinder, takes the dice in his hands and crushes them to dust, basically. Bond requests that his winnings are paid in cash. And this is very reminiscent of Goldfinger, where Oddjob crushes the golf ball after Goldfinger and Bond's game of golf. So that's quite a nice little callback there.
It is. And throughout this movie, Andy, Gobinder, he said very little dialogue, didn't he? He did have some dialogue. So he kind of reminded me a little bit of Jaws in that he's physically imposing and very much a strong, silent type. But Gobinder does have dialogue. He has little dialogue, but he does have dialogue. So it did kind of remind me of Jaws. So we then see Bond stash. So, Bond insists that he gets the winnings in cash, doesn't he? I think they offer to do a check, and he says, "No, I want cash." And he stashes his winnings in his jacket or blazer, and then gives VJ and Surindin a couple of stacks too. And then Bond then makes a very non-PC comment about, he says something like, "Keep you in curries for a few weeks." So I think that's very non-PC, in this present day.
Perpetuated stereotypes, at the very least, I would say. So you can get away with that kind of thing in an 80s film. Not so much these days, and there's no real need for it, has to be said. It doesn't add anything to the film. But we move on from there, and we've got a chase involving tuk-tuks. VJ makes the joke that the tuk-tuk is a company car and speeds off doing a wheelie. And this is where he starts using his tennis racket to fend off some of the henchmen that are chasing. Now, there's a number of henchmen that he fights during this kind of chase and fight sequence combination. There's the part where he throws a man onto a bed of nails, and there's someone going onto a line of flaming coals. But the camera kind of lingers on some of these a little bit too long, and particularly the nails. When the man gets thrown onto the bed of nails, you can see that they're clearly made of rubber, and that the nails are bent as opposed to sticking in the skin. But because the camera just keeps on that shot just for a little bit too long, it makes it blatantly obvious that he's not on a real bed of nails. So I think it's a bit of poor editing, poor camera work, I would say.
Yeah, and Andy, I didn't make a note on here, but I was thinking about this when I was typing up the notes. That chase scene and the little bits of action fight scenes that he has there, it reminded me of one of the Indiana Jones films. I can't remember which one it is, but where he's fighting in like the marketplace, and he fights. There's that one scene. I can't remember which one it is. Has the baddie bloke got some knives, and then Indiana Jones just basically shoots him. That whole scene there, I think, where I can't remember, there's a chase bit, and this might not be relevant at all, but it just kind of reminded me of Indiana Jones, this bit. But I think this film would have come before Indiana Jones.
Be a similar time frame, wouldn't it? Because Indiana Jones was early 80s, if I remember correctly. One to research, I would say.
Yeah, and one thing the wife picked up here is regarding the tuk-tuk chase is and this is a continuity bit, which I didn't put down earlier on, but I've included here. In some shots, in VJ's and Bond's tuk-tuk, there is a front glass window, but then in other shots, there is no glass in front of the tuk-tuk. It's just like there's just nothing there. Also, a nice little bit here with VJ drives through a poster in the wall, and then another poster slides down to hide Bond's escape route. So you see Govinda and his henchmen basically like looking around because they don't know where he's gone. So I like that little bit. And then, you know, Q is on location again, or is he? So I like this because I like Q getting out there. So that's good. But then we get the usual banter between Q and Bond. And then Bond also makes a comment about keeping it up when Q is demonstrating the rope that extends up, but then it kind of flops over. So then you picked something out here, Andy, which I didn't pick up.
Yeah, so as part of some research I did, it turns out that Desmond Llewellyn didn't actually travel to India. Although he's on location, Q is on location, Desmond Llewellyn didn't travel. He filmed his scenes at Pinewood Studios. So it's a nice little tip. I'm not sure of the reason why he didn't go to India, but I thought that was an interesting little factoid there. And continuing the scene with Q and Bond, we've got Q demonstrating the TV watch, and there's a camera set up, and it's pointed at something or other, and then the image is displayed on a screen nearby, which is to replicate the screen on the watch. Bond takes control of the camera and decides he's going to zoom in on a woman's cleavage who's sat at the table nearby, and he keeps zooming in and out, so obviously that's making her cleavage show up on the screen. And Q says something to Bond to tell him off. I think he calls him an adolescent, which made me smile because, you know, when you think of calling someone an adolescent and basically telling someone to grow up, you think of a teenager or, you know, someone immature. But Bond at this point, or certainly more at this point, is a man in his 50s, so he really should know better.
He should do, but I think there's a lots of 50-plus-year-old men would be doing that. It just seemed not out of place, but it would just, I don't know. I can't put it in words what that bit, it just, because usually there's innuendos, isn't there, with Bond? But that wasn't innuendo. It was just basically just being a perv, because you saw him look at the watch and then he clocks the camera, doesn't he? And then he like walks around, turns the camera around and just starts just doing that. And the missus said there that would be workplace sexual harassment. You know, that happened.
For sure. He's just being a dirty old man, I think, on this one.
Yeah. And then, so Bond gets back to his hotel restaurant and Magda's there, and they end up having dinner together, and then they end up having sex. And afterwards, she makes a comment that she needs refilling. So I had a little chuckle to myself here because I then made a quip to the missus there saying, "Oh, Bond just filled her up," and she said I was dirty there. So sorry, I'm acting like a 50-year-old man here, just following on what we were just saying about Bond there.
It's really at your age, Jay.
I'm 9 years younger than the 50-something man there, but yeah, that did make me chuckle. But she also has a very fake tattoo that I know you picked up on as well, Andy, and a comment I've made here. So she's got an octopus on her. This very much reminds me of what the kids have, you know, when you were younger, and my kids, where you use a damp cloth just to apply the tattoo. It didn't look very realistic.
No, I agree. I wrote down one of those like bubblegum things where you get a bubblegum and you get a free tattoo in the bubblegum. I think it was like Spider-Man usually. And so you have the bubblegum and then it's like a transfer, and you put it on your arm, and then you rub the paper and then rip the paper away, and you have a terrible looking tattoo that lasts about 20 minutes. Look like one of those. You see Kamal, he pulls up outside. He's got a private reg number, KAM1. That's quite the status symbol. I know private reg numbers are probably quite common these days, but I would imagine a plate like that's going to go for a pretty penny. And Bond notices that Magda is stealing the egg, and she tries to discreetly hide it behind her back, but it's in full view of a mirror, so of course Bond knows what's going off. But he doesn't seem to fight her too much.
Yeah, so you see Magda go. So she ties her dress to the balcony rail and then kind of does this flip and roll down from Bond's balcony and then lands safely with Kamal, who's waiting at the bottom in his car. Well, he's come out his car. So the missus made a comment here to say, oh, so the dress was exactly the right length. So I don't know, she was, you know, I'm not generalizing here, but females do tend to notice about different of, you know, other women's dresses and stuff. So she just made a comment that exactly the I don't know what you call it, a throwy bit, the flowy bit, you know, that she has draped around her, and then it's just exactly the right length just to roll down. So she did make a comment there. We go back to Kamal's base, which we find out later is Kamal's base and mansion, and all the female guards are wearing black and red here, and there's lots of scantily clad ladies on Octopussy's base.
Yeah, this sounds like something that Bond's going to enjoy very much. All those ladies there. There's a lot of guards, female guards, and the red and black outfits that they're wearing makes them look like they should be in The Incredibles. I think there's a point you noted here. So any fans of the Incredibles from the Disney Pixar film wouldn't look out of place in that film with this kind of outfit that they're wearing. And we notice it more later on as well. And we also see the blue-ringed octopus in this scene. Now, a little factoid on the blue-ringed octopus is that they are extremely poisonous. I think your wife may have picked up on this as she was watching it with you, but the note I have here, and thank you to the researchers for putting this one in, it's more toxic. The venom from the octopus is more toxic than any land mammal, and one bite can kill up to 26 men.
That's interesting. And yes, so when the blue-ringed octopus appeared on the scene here, Andy, the missus said, oh, that's a blue-ringed octopus, because I don't think they actually mention it's a blue-ringed octopus at that point. But she says, oh, it's a blue-ringed octopus. So I turned to her saying, what? How do you know that? And she said she read something, and then I just made a quip saying I thought she only read romantic novels because she reads like soft porn novels and stuff. So yeah, I made a note there that I was surprised there that she picked that up as well.
Some interesting knowledge there. I mean, we talked about Bond earlier having a random array of knowledge, but that's seaplanes and blue-ringed octopuses that your wife knows about.
That is, yeah, maybe.
Just keep an eye on her.
I think I will have to, yeah. So Bond then wakes up after he's been knocked out by Govinda at the hotel, and we then see Govinda come into his room, and he states that dinner's at 8 p.m. So I don't know what time of the day it is then. So I don't know, Bond is basically hanging around all day, or he's got a few hours to kill. But then at dinner, he comes down, and Kamal's there and Magda's there, and they basically have a mouthful of souffle. But then the plates are taken away, and I'm like, what? So they've been waiting, the souffle's there, and Kamal, he makes a comment, doesn't he, about something like, oh, we can't let the souffle wait, or something like that. And then they literally have one mouthful, and then the plates are taken. But then it's followed up by a stuffed sheep's head, and then Kamal pulls out an eye and eats it. And I was like, great, the souffle, which is something I could eat. And then they take that and then leave the sheep's head. And you don't actually see Bond eat anything there, do you? So I am assuming he passes up on the mains.
I would assume so. What a waste of food as well. You don't take one bite and then take your plate away. If that was the service I was getting, I would be livid at that point. But I made this note here, and I feel like a bit of a broken record, Bond is essentially a prisoner. So he's been captured by the main villain, and this has happened in numerous films now. But he's treated really, really well. He's in a really fancy room. Yes, there are metal bars on the window, which we'll get to in a second. But, you know, he's been invited down to dinner. Everything is very formal and cordial, and they're speaking friendly with him. And it's just not how you would expect a prisoner to be treated. And this is multiple films now where the main villain has kind of entertained his prisoner in Bond, as opposed to, you know, kept him locked in a darkened dungeon somewhere. Just it's becoming a bit of a recurring theme where the prisons that Bond visits are, you know, better than most people's homes.
And that goes back to the very first episode, Andy, very first film. Do you remember in Dr. No? And it's like visiting a spa, because he gets a dressing gown, doesn't he?
Dressing gown and slippers,
Slippers.
Again, invited down for dinner.
Yeah. So it's a consistent theme. So I don't think you sound like a broken record. It is. He gets treated a lot better, because I don't think he's a prisoner, so I don't think he's a POW, but I think there's lots of prisoners out there in the real world that would love to be treated how Bond is being treated.
The prison population would be through the roof if you found out that was the treatment you were getting. It'd be better than going on holiday. But Bond does want to escape. He is a prisoner after all. And he's got his little fountain pen thing that can melt the metal bars with the substance that's within. Yeah, Bond melts the metal bars with his fountain pen, and he escapes. And at this point, he sees the helicopter arrive, and there's military uniforms of the Soviet Union. And I made a note here that it's very lucky that they let Bond keep his pen and his watch.
So this is actually one of my favorite scenes, isn't it? This whole next few minutes. So Bond sneaks down to the basement, and he listens into the conversation between Kamal and General Orlov. And then Gobinder and some guards are like, you can hear them coming back. So then he has to hide in the cool room with some corpses as well. So they discover that Bond has escaped, and Kamal orders a big hunt.
So Bond hides in a body bag, and he's driven out by a couple of guards, and they throw this body bag onto a pile of other corpses. Obviously, they didn't know that there's a live body in there. What was interesting here is they didn't drive very far. They're literally just dumping the bodies outside the main doors down a slope. And there are other bodies down there, so the smell must be pretty bad, because it's very, very close by. Bond escapes the body bag, and then he's being, he runs into the jungle effectively, and he's being hunted through the jungle. And he comes across some spiders on a web and just squats them, like as if they're nothing. And if you remember back to episode 1, one of the discussion points I raised was whether a tarantula could be squashed with a shoe. Is a shoe strong enough to kill a tarantula? Whereas in this scene, I'm not sure that they were necessarily tarantulas. They were pretty sizable spiders, though. And he just squats them away as if they're nothing. So there's a bit of an inconsistency there, potentially. But I don't know how much care and attention to detail was paid when rehearsing spiders as part of the film production. But some of the other animals are seen in this as well. Bond comes across a tiger. Tells the tiger to sit, which was quite amusing. And then he sees a snake, and he tells the snake to hiss off.
I missed that bit, Andy, and I think that bit might be when I was checking my phone. So I picked up the tiger bit where it tells it to, where Bond tells it to sit, but then I missed the snake bit. But during this whole sequence, which I think is good, Bond is being chased. I did like all that. It reminded me a bit of George Lazenby's Bond, where, he's being chased through the village and he comes across Tracy, and there's panic, and you feel that is one of the times that he's really in danger. So this whole sequence where he's being chased, I feel that it's really portrayed by Roger Moore that, you know, there's danger there and he's really flustered. And one of my notes is here, it's one of the few times that Roger Moore's hair is a mess, because we've made numerous comments over the last few episodes that Roger Moore is very stylish and everything is always kind of like in place, but this is very much noticeable in terms of his hair. So then we get to the bit that we just thought was just absolutely ridiculous, and it just felt like it was done purely for laughs. So this is the bit where Bond swings between some trees like Tarzan, and he does the Tarzan yell. And Andy, as I've said numerous times in the podcast, I'm not the actor, so I'm not going to try to replicate the Tarzan yell. So feel free if you want to do that. But this was done purely for laughs, for the audience benefit, pleasure. But it just seemed really out of place, and it kind of brought back memories of the Man in the Golden Gun with the car barrel.
Oh, the ridiculous sound effects over the jump over the bridge. Yeah.
And it's like in this scene, Bond is being chased by an army. Yeah, he's being hunted by an army. So why does he swing and then yell and just brings all the attention to himself? Why is he not trying to be more stealthy? And before I pass on to you, Andy, the last comment here is, then Bond, you know, he manages to escape a bit more after doing his Tarzan impression, and then he has a leech on him, and then he's just being chased by a crocodile.
Yeah, ridiculous is the word. I'm not going to do the Tarzan yell because my son is sleeping in the next room, and my wife won't thank me for waking him up at this late hour that we're recording at. But question I had here is the sound effect, you know, the Tarzan yell, is that actually from a Tarzan film? Because it didn't sound like James Bond doing a Tarzan impression or Roger Moore doing a Tarzan impression. It sounded like the actual Tarzan sound effect, and I wonder if that's the case. And going back to earlier films, we've had the Jaws effect, sound effects, I believe. We've had, is it Close Encounters of the Third Kind as well, and maybe one or two others that have escaped my memory, but there seems to be this kind of sharing of sound effects between films, and I wonder if this is another example of that. Maybe,
and nothing in my research has identified whether it was copied over, you know, they borrowed the sound effect, or someone replicated, because like you said, it doesn't sound like it's Roger Moore. So unless they've just pulled some stock, you know, some sound stock or some sound effect through that they've just used. But yeah, it was just ridiculous. So I'm glad we're both singing from the same hymn sheet there. But then I thought this was a little funny quip, and like you said, there's numerous quips in this film. So Bond swims out to the tour boat, and then he makes some quip about being on the economy tour, which I thought was quite funny, because one of the tourists, I think it's a woman, says, "Oh, were you in our party, or were you on our boat?" And then he obviously makes that comment there. So I thought that was quite funny. Yeah, it was a nice little line there. Moving from there, we see Bond trying to infiltrate Octopussy's mansion, and he uses a crocodile in order to do this. And what I mean by that is, for those who maybe haven't seen the film or are trying to recall the scene, it's essentially a crocodile submarine, for lack of a better term, or is it a submarine crocodile? Age-old question, which came first. But he's basically in some sort of crocodile suit or machine, and that he uses to float up to the mansion. And this is the first time we get to see what Octopussy looks like. And she looks very, very familiar. As a matter of fact, she kind of looks like the girl from The Man with the Golden Gun. And that's because it's the same actress, Maud Adams, playing two different Bond girls in two different films. And we've talked about the recycling of actors earlier on in the series, and this happened on numerous occasions, but they're not normally in such main roles. So two different Bond girls in two different films is
is quite the accomplishment. And she also, just a bit of a footnote for next week, she also appears in A View to a Kill, albeit in an uncredited role. So technically, she's 3 for 3.
She is. And Andy, I did try to research this because I think it's very weird that they use an actress to play 2 different Bond girls. So I think that's very weird. So I basically, I wondered whether they had another actress lined up, but then that actress then fell out at the last minute. So then they turned on to someone that they respected or they've worked with before. But I couldn't find anything in the research to actually back up that claim. So yeah, and I wonder as well, she's not seen on screen for the first part of that film. So I think is around 1 hour, 10 minutes or something that you actually see her face. And I don't know if that was intentional because she's been in it before. So this kind of order building up that suspense. So it is, I think it's very weird, that bit. And I've not added this note on here, Andy, and I'm just going to check my quiz because I don't want to ruin the quiz before I say this next comment. Yes, it's not on my quiz. So Maud Adams, in terms of her uncredited role in A View to a Kill, so apparently, based on the research, she visited, because she was friends with the production crew, she visited the set with her husband when they were filming A View to a Kill. And then they made some comment to say, oh, do you want to be an extra in a background? So she's in the background as just an extra. So that's where she is appearing, like you said, 3 for 3 there. So I think that's an interesting tidbit there. But so Bond finds out that Octopussy is a wealthy businesswoman and a jewel smuggler. So that kind of brought back memories of Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, in terms of the diamond smugglers as well. So when they mentioned that, I thought, oh, jewel smugglers. So Octopussy tells Bond that, she's the daughter of the traitor that Bond exposed. And then she thanked him for, I thought, this is going to turn bad, but she basically thanks him for delaying the arrest long enough so he could commit suicide instead of being arrested. And then we see shortly afterwards, Bond forcefully kisses Octopussy. So Octopussy leaves the room. She goes into the bedroom. She's like all stroppy. And then Bond comes in and then, forcefully kisses her. And then they end up sleeping with each other.
Yeah, this is another uncomfortable scene. And I noted that I thought we'd left this sort of thing behind with Sean Connery, because we'd seen Connery do this a few times as Bond. And, kind of forces himself on her, and they fight back for a matter of seconds and then give in. And this is another example of that, where Octopussy is non-compliant, but then very quickly changes her mind. Just scenes like this have not aged well, in my opinion. Moving on slightly, VJ is patiently waiting for Bond to return. He's kind of across the water, and at this point he's killed by one of Kamal's men. There's a henchman who's got this circular blade on a yo-yo string, so it's a pretty cool weapon actually, where he just drops the string, like you would a yo-yo, but it's got a circular blade that does the damage. And said henchman is in Octopussy's mansion later on, where it's invaded. Gets into a bit of a scrap with Bond, and they both go into the water. And Octopussy thinks that Bond has been killed by a crocodile in the water while this fight is happening on. We obviously later find out that's not the case, so presumably it's the henchman is the one that's killed, and I don't believe we see him again, so that would make sense. But a bit of a glaring continuity error here is that when they're fighting before they go into the water, the henchman is topless, but when you see the shots in the water, he's clearly wearing some sort of bodysuit, because you can see black sleeves on the arms sticking out of the water. So it's not even a real close attempt to make him look same. It's very, very different clothing.
Yeah, so we leave India and we return back to Europe. So we're in Germany now. So Octopussy Circus is in town. So we see the twin knife throwers now performing for the Soviet Union audience. And that includes some military people and some civilians there. We also see General Orlov's men switch the train carriages, and the carriage now has a nuclear bomb instead of a cache of jewels in the safe, which obviously Octopussy isn't aware of the switch at this point.
We see Bond escaping in a car, and the tyres are blown. And the wheels that remain seem to just perfectly fit the train line. So he then can drive on the train tracks, so he can chase after the bomb that's on the train. And this reminded me of an old episode of Top Gear. For those who are familiar, this is Clocks and Hammond and May pissing about with cars, basically, is what Top Gear is. And there's an episode where they turn cars into trains, and this just reminded me of that because you've got a car driving on the rail line. And Bond manages to climb onto Octopussy's train just as another train hits his car. The car gets launched into the river and hits a fisherman's boat. That was a nice little scene there, I thought.
Yeah, it was. And we've got this bit now, Andy, where you pick this up in the Goose continuity bit. So Bond is hiding in the gorilla outfit. So the comment here I've made is, he's been in disguise, a number of different costumes, disguises as well. But in terms of animals, he's dressed as a gorilla and a crocodile to avoid detection in Octopussy. So he's really mixing it up. He's really turning up his game in terms of, in the last episode, he was a friar, and now he's been a horse trainer, Colonel Toro, a gorilla, a crocodile, and then obviously later on he dresses up again. So he's really mixing it up with his and to be fair, he's thinking on his feet here, Andy, because the gorilla outfit isn't one that Q has provided. It's just conveniently in the trailer, the train carriage as well. So he likes to dress up there. He'd be great on a fancy dress party, wouldn't he? One of those nights out, a fancy dress.
You could wear a different outfit in each bar if you go on a bit of a pub crawl in fancy dress, and he turns up with a different outfit to each one. But you're right, it wasn't a government-issued gorilla costume with any gadgets that Q meant. It was just a bog-standard run-of-the-mill gorilla suit that you find in a train.
As you do. So again, following on from Andy's comment earlier, we now get one of my favourite scenes is where Bond is fighting on the top of the train with Gobinda, and it's Grishka. So this is where I've made a note of Grishka. And Bond and Grishka fall off the train, and Bond eventually gets the upper hand, and he kills the knife thrower.
Yeah, this is a good scene, but slightly ruined for me by the fact that you can see a clear shot of the stuntman's face in the fight scene. And this has happened in a few Bond films now, where there's obviously going to be a stuntman involved, but usually there's an attempt to hide the face. In this instance, the face was clearly on display, so you can see that it's a stuntman. Later on, Bond is trying to hitch a lift, and there's a car pulls up full of young people, and they tease him and then drive off. He eventually gets a lift, but he needs to make a call, and he finds a public telephone booth. But a woman kind of beats him to the punch, and she gets into the booth, and I think he's probably too politely asking to use the phone, and she's being rude and continuing with her call. So he steals her car. And a funny note that you wrote in the notes was it's not got the same anti-burglary device that Bond's Lotus had in For Your Eyes Only. That made me chuckle. Though clearly she's not got Q making her cars for her. But my question is, why didn't he just throw her out of the phone box? This is James Bond. He does what he likes. But instead, he's being somewhat chivalrous and allowing her to make a phone call, which is not going to be important, but he needs to get a message to someone.
I agree, Andy, definitely, because especially he has overheard, Gobinda, General Orlov, talking about this nuclear bomb that's going to go off. So he's made a note of the time, and he's just like really impatient but he's just not throwing her out. And like you said, he's just being too polite. Surely you know that, you know, Europe is on the brink of World War III. You know what the Russians' plan are. You'd be a bit more forceful in that situation, surely. You wouldn't just play nice and wait for this lady to finish making her phone call.
No, there's no time for politeness here.
No, and this is one bit. So this bit really, I made this comment to the missus while it was happening, because I remembered this as it was, you know, just before it happened. I remember this. So we see a scene now that there's 5 minutes on the timer, and Bond, he gets to the military base. You know, he crashes through the barrier, and you know the guards of the military base are looking for him. The police are looking for, everyone's looking for him basically. But he has time to go into a changing room and get changed into a clown outfit. And then he has the time as well to do full makeup. So when this happened, just before this happened, I said to the missus, I said, oh, this is where it's ridiculous. I said, like, you see 5 minutes on the timer, he gets changed in a clown outfit and he has a full makeup on. And then when he comes out, the missus said, no, he's wearing a mask. I said, no, it's proper makeup. You know, he's applied all his makeup. And I was half thinking, he's managed to do his makeup in less than 5 minutes. And then when you're waiting for the missus, how long it takes her to do the makeup, blimey. And he's done all that. It's a bit unrealistic. So you just, then, I can't remember what the timer is when he actually makes it into the, what is it called? The big top? The
big top, yeah.
Yep. He makes it, and I can't remember what the timer is. But in those 5 minutes, he's, like I said, he's had an outfit change again. He's done full makeup, located the bomb, and disarmed it. And it was like, really? All that's happened.
I mean, that is quite the productive 5 minutes. I think not only is he wearing full clown makeup, but it's a very good job he's done as well. So that's another thing to add to his skill set, is clown makeup. We move on to Delhi. We're back in India now, and Octopussy's troops infiltrate Kamal's base. And there's a bit where one of the guards kind of falls from the top of the building. So one of Octopussy's troops catch him to kind of soften the noise, which was some good ingenuity on the fly thinking. And we see that some of the troops are wearing the aforementioned red and black Incredible style uniform, which is not really useful in a discreet covert operation. You know, kind of sticks out like a sore thumb.
I agree. And talking about not being discreet, we see Bond and Q arrive in a big balloon that has a massive print of the Union Jack. So it's obviously, you know, we've discussed before, everyone knows James Bond, what he looks like. You know, when he died, it was on the front page of all the newspapers. So, you know, even though he's a secret agent, you know, everyone knows his identity. This reminded me of For Your Eyes Only, Andy, where Columbo and Bond go to the night mission in their big white yacht, in terms of how discreet they are. So you've got the Octopussies, the Incredible troops in red and black. You've got Bond and Q turn up with a massive air balloon with the Union Jack printed on it. So not discreet at all.
They might as well be wearing neon signs saying Bond is here.
Yeah. And if it was done now, I don't use Facebook and I don't know if this is a thing still, but this just feels like in Facebook, I think you used to check in. So it's like Bond and Q basically, oh, I'm going to check into Kamal Khan's base, check in. And then Kamal, oh, look, Bond and Q's here. That's what it feels like, you know. I don't know if you check
Kamal hits like. Or maybe replies down in a minute. LOL.
But yeah, I just thought that was, again, it was just done for laughs there. So Bond descends into the base and then he slides down the stair banisters And then at the end, there's a decorative banister cap, and he shoots it. But you can see as he goes across it, obviously it's not perfectly flat. There's, damage there. So he nearly damaged some of his crown jewels there. But also Q lands the big air balloon on some Kamal's guards and then saves some Octopussy's troops. They're very appreciative. And Q at first, he goes, oh, can't remember what he said. He's something like, oh, not now. Or he makes some comment. And then you hear at the end of that bit, he says, maybe later. And he's like, oh, he's having a go at James Bond early on about zooming in on his watch. And now he's thinking, oh, he wants to get into the action now, doesn't he?
Yeah, there's life in the old dog, yeah. You really want at this point Bond to come up and give him a taste of his own medicine and say something like, pay attention, Q.
Or he just hear, but yeah, he says about he has trouble keeping it up. The line earlier with the rope, just to bit of banter with Q.
Yeah, I nearly said something when you're talking about Bond sliding down the banister that if he'd had not shot that decorative cap away, he could have done damage to his 00 and his 7. But I didn't make that joke. Bond is soon seen chasing after a plane. So the plane's on the runway, getting ready to take off, and Bond is riding a horse. And I repeat, Bond is chasing after a plane, and Bond is riding a horse. Is a horse really faster than a plane? Because I would say that is preposterous.
I agree, Andy. I don't know, because I don't know how fast the plane goes. We know what the little BD5 goes 215 miles per hour, from our earlier research. But yeah, this kind of brought back memories. Not exactly the same, but which Bond was it where he was basically being Clint Eastwood, with the old Western? Is that Moonraker again?
Would that have been Moonraker again, I think, yeah.
That was so unintentional. But yeah, it just reminded me of a bit with the horse. I'm not saying all horses are related to Westerns, but yeah, it did bring back memories there.
Yeah, he's using previous skills for future missions. That's, adapting and learning, so good on him. He catches the plane, and I think he's hanging off the back of it somehow as it's flying through the air. And Gobinda's in the plane. I'm trying to remember the scene in my head. I think Khan and Gobinda are flying the plane, and Khan tells Gobinda to go get Bond because they realise he's on the wing or he's on the roof of the plane or something. So Gobinda opens the plane door. Now, whenever we see things happen on a plane mid-air, the cabin loses air pressure and the things get kind of sucked out the window or out the door or whatever. But in this case, nothing happens. He just kind of stands there like he's at his front door. So, is this another continuity error? Is this a mistake, or is this just someone forgetting the rules of physics? Just seemed very odd, that did.
Yeah, I didn't pick this up, Andy, but when I was reading your notes, I totally agree, because any film that you see that there's some kind of plane hijack, I remember I watched one of the Batman's Dark Knight films recently, with Bane in the airplane at the beginning scene, and they open the door and you can see all the wind and everything blowing, where they're pretending to shoot the baddies and throw them out, but obviously Bane's there. That reminded me of that as well. But yeah, that was definitely an oversight. But I don't know, because it's the film from the 80s, is that something they just did in the 80s? They didn't really factor that in. Is that something that came in, say, maybe the 90s onwards? Or is it just an oversight? I don't know.
I don't know, but isn't there a similar scene in Goldfinger where they're on the jets? And I don't know whether if I've got this wrong, we'll just edit it out, but I'm pretty sure there's a scene in Goldfinger where Bond, and it may be Goldfinger himself, are fighting on the plane, and either the door opens or a window is broken, and the cabin air pressure is lost and things start flying around. Sure, that happens in Goldfinger.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But whoever did that scene for this film, shame on you. You did it wrong. But anyway, we get a short scene next to MI6. We've got M and General Gogol talking about returning the Romanov Star Jewel.
This is another Bond film, Andy, where it ends at sea with a Bond girl. And I've not been tracking this, so I can't remember out of the 13 Bond films that we've seen so far, how many of them end with a sea scene. So that is something, we picked up. But also, I was surprised with this bit before it happened, where you see the scene with Bond he's got an arm in a sling and he's got his foot in, I don't know if it's plaster, but he's got his foot up, hasn't he, as well? And I was just about to make some notes to go, this must be one of the few times, if only the only time, where we see Bond is actually injured. But then he basically is just faking it. So my comment here is Bond is faking it in bed. ...
Probably the first true example of equality in the Bond films in this scene, if we've got one of the males faking it. But that brings us to the end of the film. That's the final scene.
The Rain Room.
This is a 60-second review by a James Bond superfan. This week's review has been provided by Stuart. Stuart, you have 60 seconds. Start the clock.
Our next Bond film is the wonderfully innuendo entitled Octopussy, which stars Sir Roger Moore. It's not a carry-on film, but the title's definitely keeping the British end up. 007 is sent on the trail of a dead agent, with the only clue being a Fabergé egg. It's a high-stakes adventure mixing a circus, a smuggling ring, nuclear weapons, a tennis pro, and an island full of beautiful women, led by a woman who's not really that old, but seen as the most age-appropriate Bond girl for Sir Roger. The villain even tries to outcamp Sir Roger Moore, and as an added treat, we have an 80s version of a bus trucker trial, complete with a sheep's eye, many stars for campness. We also have the most unintentionally chilling line from any Bond film, the Bond girl who collects memories. So if you like Englishmen with a nasty habit for survival, you like eggs, preferably Fabergé, and dice, preferably loaded, then maybe you're a Toro too. 5 Fabergé eggs.
A big thank you to Stuart for recording this week's 60-second review by a James Bond superfan on the Rating Room.
The Rain Room.
Anyway, so this is one of our routine segments. So this is the one-liners / quotes. So there's a few little ones this week. So I've got the first one. So this is Bond and VJ. So James Bond goes, VJ, we have company. And VJ says, no problem. This is a company car. And then it speeds off and does a wheelie.
Yeah, I like that. It was a good scene. Kamal has a good line where he's obviously pretty peeved at Bond, and he just says, Bond is of a rare breed, soon to be extinct.
That is a good one. So the next one I've got is one actually, Andy, that I covered at the top of the podcast, isn't it? So this is between James Bond, Smallbone, and Moneypenny. So James Bond goes, you know me? And then Penelope Smallbone goes, Miss Moneypenny described you. And then Miss Moneypenny goes, in nauseating detail. And then James Bond goes, really?
Yeah, one final one from me. There's a scene where Q and VJ are waiting for Bond. VJ says to Q, is he still there? And Q replies, you must be joking. 007 on an island populated exclusively by women. We won't see him till dawn.
That's probably one of my favourite quotes in the film, that one. So another segment that we like to do is the book versus movie. So this is actually, this film is a combination of short stories. So we've got Octopussy and then The Property of a Lady as well.
The Octopussy short story covers the backstory of Bond tracking down Major Dexter Smythe for a war crime. and he allows him to commit suicide rather than be arrested. And this is referenced in the film by Octopussy and what happened to her father.
Whereas the Puppeteer Lady involves Bond at Sotheby's messing up a Russian plan to pay an agent by rigging an auction for a priceless Fabergé trinket. So, Andy, before we move on to the segment that everyone is waiting for, your joke, I quite like that they took two different, or took a combination of short stories. So, Octopussy with the backstory, and then the Puppeteer Lady around the Fabergé egg. I quite like that they took the combination there to pull it through a plot, and also the backstory of Octopussy, the linked into Octopussy actually saying that in a film about her father. I like that.
Yeah, it was nicely interwoven in the film. Yeah, it's a good spot.
The Rain Room.
So, Jay, it's that time of the week again. Are you ready for a joke?
I need cheering up, Andy. Let's do a joke.
All these mentions of Moonraker really brought the tone down in some regards. So here we go. I'm inventing a glue, and I'm going to call it James Bond because it's a chemical agent.
I like that, Andy. It's funny.
We'll add in a laughter track, rapturous applause there.
But like I think I said last week, if there's any listeners out there that has a James Bond joke that isn't too rude for us to say on our podcast, please feel free to send it, via any of our social media accounts or via our website. So, Andy, you've just done your infamous joke section. Now we've got the quiz.
Are you ready? Let's start the quiz.
So this is where you come under a bit of pressure now to get the question right or aim for 100%. I don't know. Do you aim for 100% all the time, or are you happy to have, 50%?
I aim for 100% in life all the time.
So even though I just
second best is the first loser.
That is true. That's the kind of attitude James Bond will have as well.
Yeah, I'm just throwing that out there because there's a vacancy for Bond. I've not seen my name on recent bookies odds sheets, but I'll be on there somewhere. There's a bit of an outside bet, but a few more of these podcasts, and maybe I start challenging the likes of Tom Hardy and whoever else is on the list. Idris Elba.
Andy, just to go back where I kind of opened on this bit to say, this is where I put you under pressure. I must admit, I feel the pressure actually is more on me to try to find two statements that are false that you will think are factual.
And this is where my mind game comes into effect, because you think you've got the upper hand, but actually you are just a pawn in my game. So go ahead, ask your quiz questions, see what happens.
Okay. So regular listeners will be well aware of this segment, but just to recap for any new listeners. So this is the segment where I will pose to Andrew 4 statements. 2 of these statements are correct and 2 of these statements are incorrect. So as usual, Andy, I will say all 4 statements, and then if you want me to repeat any, just let me know. And then feel free to either go one by one or tell me the 2 that you think are correct, and then I will let you know. So are you ready for statement A?
I am ready.
Okay. So the quip at the beginning of the opening sequence where Bond goes, "Fill her up," was initially removed by director John Glenn. Statement B. Kamal's cheating in backgammon was originally taken from the Goldfinger book In the book, Goldfinger cheats at backgammon and Oddjob crushes the dice. However, this was altered for the Goldfinger film and replaced with the golf ball crush by Oddjob. But as like previous bits that we kind of covered in other episodes and this episode, they basically lifted one bit from a James Bond book and put it in another film. Quite a lengthy one there, Andy. Do you need me to repeat any of that one?
No, I think I've got it. Yeah, I can take a lengthy one.
I bet you can. So, statement C: professional tennis player VJ was close friends with Broccoli. When VJ retired from the professional tennis circuit, he became Michael Wilson's, who is the stepson of Broccoli, personal tennis coach. And then statement 4, the eyeball in the stuffed sheep's head that Kamal eats is made out of marzipan.
So you've gone for 4 quite challenging factoids yet again. I'm going to go straight in and say false, true, false, true. So the 2 true statements, I think, are the backgammon scene was originally from the Goldfinger book, was changed to golf, and I think the eyeball is made of marzipan, and I think the filler up being removed initially and the tennis coach fact, I think they're both false. Straight in there, 100%. Thank you very much.
Well, Andy, I can tell you, you have got 2 wrong and 2 right. So, for podcast listeners, the disappointment on the video that I'm seeing of Andy now, he's walking around his room now, smashing up he's not happy at all there. He's not happy. So, Andy, do you want to guess which ones are incorrect, or shall I just tell you what they are?
Just put me out my misery. This has been a shambles from start to finish. You've ruined my day with all the Moonraker references. Now you've cheated me in the quiz. This can't get any worse. Come on, Jay, just get it over with. Tell me what I've done wrong.
Okay, so starting from the top, the quip at the end of the opening sequence, filler up, was initially removed by director John Glenn, is correct. So basically what happened was he went to the local cinema and they actually used that line in the trailer for advertising a James Bond film. And the audience, it went down really well with the audience. So he actually put it back in the actual main film before it was released. So that was correct, but you were incorrect. The second statement about Kamal's cheating and it being taken from the Goldfinger book instead is incorrect. That is not taken from Goldfinger. I just made that up. And professional tennis player VJ, I don't know if he's close friends, but he is not a professional, he is not a personal tennis coach to Michael Wilson. So you were correct in saying that is incorrect. And then the last one, the eyeball in the stuffed sheep's head was made out of marzipan. And that is according to an interview that Roger Moore gave to someone, not to me, obviously. I don't have, obviously he's passed away now, but I don't have that line of communication with him. So Andy, yes, I would say I'm sorry you only got 50-50, but I've got a massive smile on my face. So I'm glad because you definitely got 100% last week. And I think you got 100% the week before. I think you was on at least a couple of weeks run, weren't you?
Yeah,
Positive,
I was on a 2-week winning streak for sure. I'm just going back through my notes. I think it was a 50% the week before. And the week before that, we could be here a while. and the week before that. So yeah, I was on a series of 50%ers, but then the last 2 weeks I pulled it out of the bag. And now it's back down to earth with a bang.
And maybe, like you said, because I kept putting in Moonraker cookie crumbs throughout the episode. I've just been slowly chipping away at you, and you just took your eye off the ball. Maybe, I don't know.
It's a swerve. That's what's happened.
A swerve.
You've taken the audience on a journey, and then you've veered sharply to the left with this quiz this week. Did I say viewers? I meant listeners. There's no video to this.
Not yet. You never know. Anyway, Andy, that's the quiz, and that is one of my favourite segments. But Andy, it's not my favourite. My favourite is going through these rankings.
The Rain Room.
This is the last segment we have. So this is where myself and Andy go through various different bits that we're tracking, and then we will either rank them or rate them. So I'm going to kick it off. So in terms of run times, at the top of the show, Andy mentioned Octopussy runs for 2 hours, 11 minutes. That is actually the second longest running Bond film. So that beats Thunderball by 1 minute, but is still behind on Her Majesty's Secret Service. That is 2 hours, 22 minutes. So this is the longest running Roger Moore Bond film. So kill count, I said at the beginning of the pod that in Octopussy, Bond has 15 confirmed kills. So that comes in straight at number 15. So that comes straight in at number 5. So that's a respectable kill count there. And we are tracking these kills by actors as well. So Roger Moore now has 6 movies under his belt, and that's the same as Sean Connery. However, Roger Moore has 85 confirmed kills, whereas Sean Connery has 72. So, you know, for any kind of statistical people out there, or, you know, mathematic whizzes, that is an average of 14.2 for Roger Moore and 12 for Sean Connery. I think I said this last week, Andy. I was a bit surprised by this because I think I said last week, people tend to associate Roger Moore, and he says it himself, he's more of the lover Bond, whereas Sean Connery's the killer Bond. So that was a bit surprising.
Yeah, the numbers don't lie. Moore is more of a killer so far.
Martini, Andy mentioned at the top of the show that James Bond does drink a martini, and this is where Octopussy greets Bond with one when you see Maud Adams on the screen for the first time.
Next up, we have the introduction of James Bond, which, as mentioned earlier, 31 minutes 24 seconds it took in this film. We're on a bit of a streak here. We mentioned all of Roger Moore films so far have the introduction, and Roger Moore tends to take longer than everyone else, and this is actually the second longest time so far. So this is only the second time it's taken over 30 minutes for the introduction to be reached. We do see the wearing of the hat. We've got a reversible flat cap / army hat, and I guess we've got a clown hat as well if you count in those, but no hat throw this time round. He simply places it on the hat stand. Again, we've got no Felix Leiter. We're on a streak of 5 in a row now without the appearance of Felix. And Jay loves the money talk, and he mentioned this earlier in terms of the box office. So the worldwide box office would rank 3rd up to this point, but when we adjust for inflation, it's currently bottom of the pile. So a couple of ways of looking at that there. It's still massively successful when you compare it to the budget, but by today's standards, it's bottom of the pile.
It is. So next one we're going to go through is Bond Girl. As Andy mentioned at the top of the pod, there's 3 Bond girls. So we've got Octopussy, Magda, and Bianca. So I'm gonna start from the bottom this time, Andy. And I think I said in the last few weeks we've had, and I think this is the same with villains. You seem to have one standout, and then you have kind of a weaker supporting cast. However, this entry in the franchise, Octopussy, I think it's a strong offering. So 17-year-old Bianca, 17-year-old Tina Hudson, because Bianca, I'm hoping, is playing more than a older 17-year-old in the Bond film, considering she's working for, a secret agency. She comes in at 31 on my list. So that is between Plenty O'Toole in 30 and Dink in 32 from Goldfinger, which we've mentioned a few times in this podcast, Goldfinger. Now, I've put in Magda at 18. I think she is a good Bond girl. She can look after herself. She has lots of dialogue as well. You see her before you see Octopussy. You see her, in not one of the first scenes, but you see her in terms of the auction house Sotheby's in London, and then you see her pretty much throughout the film in various scenes. So I put her in a respectable 18, which incidentally, Andy, is one above Maud Adams from The Man in the Golden Gun at 19. So I think that's a bit of a coincidence there. And then that means this week, Octopussy just misses out of the top 10 and she comes in at my number 11. Now, I oohed and ahed here, Andy, with this one because I could have easily put her in at number 10. But again, this is just a coincidence that number 10, Holly Goodhead, is from Moonraker. So that is not deliberate at all. But the reason why she's just below Holly Goodhead is you don't see Octopussy until about an hour into the film. And as we said, the film's just over 2 hours, 2 hours, 11 minutes, I think I said. So she's only in half the film. And also, I think Dr. Holly Goodhead offers more. She's the scientific. I know, when we covered the Moonraker episode, James Bond was surprised that she was female and a scientist / doctor. But I think she just offered more in terms of like a supporting asset to James Bond. And obviously she was a spy herself, wasn't she? She was working for the American agency as well. So that's why Octopussy just misses out of my top 10, but a respectable 11th. So just to recap, Octopussy in at 11, Magda 18, and then the very sexy Bianca in at 31. But unfortunately for me, Andy, Bianca was only in the first 5-10 minutes, but she comes in quite high for that because she makes quite an impression on me. So what about you, Andy? Where did you place these 3 Bond girls this week?
So we've not got too dissimilar ratings this time around. I don't know whether you covered it at the front, but we've got 49 Bond girl entries at this stage, so there's a lot of ground to cover. I'm going to go in reverse order as well, and for the 3 Bond girls we have in this film, I've gone with the same order. So Bianca is bottom of the 3, but I've put her in at 26, just above Ling from You Only Live Twice, and just below Naomi from The Spy Who Loved Me. A short but sweet appearance in the film, but very effective in helping Bond escape. Quite an impactful few minutes she had on screen, so a nice mid-table slot in at 26. Now we jump up to number 15 for Magda, just above Plenty O'Toole and just below Dr. Holly Goodhead. Magda was a very strong supporting Bond girl. You're absolutely right with what we referenced before in terms of one main Bond girl and then supporting cast of others. But Magda was very close to being ahead of Octopussy for me. She was a very strong entry. Came in at 15, but Octopussy just edged it. And then it gets tricky in terms of where do you place her because of all the other strong entries we've got at this point. But I've just put her in at my number 10 slot. So it's just below Honey Rider and just above Melina Havelock. And interestingly, only 2 places above Andrea Anders, also played by Maud Adams from The Man with the Golden Gun. So Maud Adams gets a a 10 and 12 slot as things stand. But nothing really to add in terms of reasons. Very similar to yours. Octopussy was a very good asset for Bond and ally, but didn't appear in all of the film. Bianca, same, but very, very short appearance. So that's kind of what drops her down the list. But Magda, in some ways, was the main Bond girl in terms of screen time, I think. But obviously not the main focal point of the story. So that's why she only gets in at 15.
So Andy, before we move on, so when I was placing these three this week, I was looking at everyone else, and I know you say Tilly Masterson is kind of your benchmark, and that's how you kind of drop it in, and then I kind of work, think about where does this person go, and then kind of like move up or move down to where they are. But when I was doing this list, I looked at a couple of the Bond gals, and I was thinking, oh, I'm surprised I put her that low down. Say, for example, Plenty O'Toole. When I was going through the list the other day when we were building up, this week's episode, I was surprised I had it down at 30. But obviously, we're ranking them each week, so she's there for a reason on my list. But when I think back of Plenty O'Toole, from memory, in terms of what she looks like, what she offers, in my head, I think she should be higher. But obviously I put her in at that point because we ranked it each week. So we have built it up by each film. Have you had any instances where you've looked at it, maybe not this episode, but where you started putting in a Bond gal and thinking, oh, I thought she might have been higher, but obviously, when you've looked at your list, that person is either higher or lower than what you kind of think?
Mary Goodnight for me, down at 24 from The Man with the Golden Gun. I know she was a supporting Bond girl, but for some reason, when I was reading this list, I was surprised that she was that far down. But that's kind of where my Bianca reference was. But it's funny you mentioned Plenty O'Toole, because that was my reference point for Magda, and I've got Plenty O'Toole in at 16 now, with Magda in at 15, and Dr. Holly Goodhead at 14. So that kind of trio, Dr. Goodhead and Plenty O'Toole were next to each other on the rankings, and Magda slots right between. So she was also my benchmark for this episode as well. Let's move on to the theme song. So the theme song, as mentioned, was All Time High by Rita Coolidge. I've got to say, I'm not a massive fan of the song. It was okay, but not one of the better ones. And for that reason, I've got it down at number 11 out of 13. So just above the On Her Majesty's Secret Service theme by John Barry and The Man with the Golden Gun by Lulu remains foot of the table for me. But there's a lot of strong entries. Some of the Bond songs are really, really strong. So to beat what we've already got in place, it has to be a pretty good song. And for me, this was a little bit weak, has to be said. What about you, Jay? Where did you rank this?
I agree. I'm just looking at the list, Andy, and I think some of our other list, we do have variances, but some of the list are very similar. Whereas this one, I think this is kind of going to the former, where I don't think this is one of the better songs, but it's not a weak song. So for me, I put it in at number 9 out of 13. If I'm being completely honest, I played the Rating Room Spotify playlist, and I was listening to All Time High and Nobody Does It Better. And I listened to these back to back a few times because I couldn't quite figure out where All Time High would drop in. Would it go in at number 9 or would it go in at number 10? So I was quite happy that it wasn't higher than 9 and it wasn't lower than 10. But I had to play both songs a few times to kind of figure out where exactly it dropped in. Because for me, the Man with the Golden Gun and From Russia with Love, for me, are definitely the two weakest songs. And in terms of the stronger songs, I'm still very much Shirley Bassey in terms of Diamonds Are Forever and Goldfinger. So I knew this song was coming in at the best, like I said, at number 9, but I just couldn't quite, like I said, I had to figure it out, listen to both songs a few times before I kind of slot it in. And it's interesting, Andy, just looking across your list here, Nobody Does It Better is quite highly ranked in your list.
Yeah, I think it's quite a different song. I kind of get your thinking in terms of, they're similar era, somewhat similar style, but Nobody Does It Better is a far superior song in my mind. That this is almost like a cheap knockoff of that style. But yeah, very interesting. Good. It's good to think differently sometimes. We don't have to always follow the path that others take.
No, and I don't know. I've not done any research in terms of what other people rank, or like various websites might have various rankings for Bond songs. I've not looked at anything here, so this is purely down to personal choice at the moment.
Our ratings are the only ones that matter, it has to be said. So any listeners out there, don't even bother looking for any other opinions. Jay's and Andy's are all you need.
Yes, I co-sign that, Andy. So moving on, so we're talking about the opening credits. I struggled again with this one because you said it before, a lot of the opening credits now are quite samey. So I think the Roger Moore ones are very... Sean Connery ones, opening credits were very similar, but because they started quite basic with Dr. No, and then they evolved, you did see an increase in quality. And then by the time Connery left, it kind of dropped off. Whereas on my rankings, the Roger Moore films, I'm just looking now, are quite consistent in where they are. They're all mid-table. So out of the 13, I've put Octopussy at number 6. So Andy, I was surprised when I saw yours. So where did you put Octopussy in your list?
Bottom of the pile. I know you were surprised by that, but for me, and I echo some of the things I said about Moonraker, it feels lazy. And this was another instance where it's the same old, but they've tried to do something new, which normally I would appreciate. So things like the neon projections, and we've got the lasers and the still images of Roger Moore, but it felt like a step backwards for me in terms of the evolution of the opening credits. And we've been, at this point, there's 20 years worth to go over, and they've not taken a step forward. This was a step back for me. I just felt it was quite weak, so I couldn't justify putting it any higher. It was a toss-up between Octopussy and Moonraker for bottom of the pile, and ultimately I felt this was worse than Moonraker.
And that says something, Andy, because we all know how low you think of Moonraker. I agree with you in terms of it's not doing anything new, but for me, even though it's very similar to the other Moore ones, it's not doing anything wrong. So even though it feels quite old, and I don't know, you could say a bit stale, it's still for me better than the other ones that I've listed. So look on our website so you can see the actual rankings. But for me, it's very much a solid mid-entry in terms of the Roger Moore ones. But I get what you're saying. I want to know as well, when do they start getting jazzed up a bit more or reimagined?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to finding that out, and hopefully sooner rather than later. But let's move on to villains. So there's quite a list of villains. I think there's 6 we called out at the start of the podcast. I'm going to go in reverse order again. So for reference, at this point in time, we've got 38 villains on the board. And straight in at 37 and 38, bottom of the pile, I've got Magda and Octopussy. Octopussy slap bang at the bottom, Magda just above. And the reason I've got them so low down is I don't really see them as villains. I know technically they are, but the way the film plays out and the lasting impression I have of them both, not villains in my mind, so I couldn't justify putting them anywhere on the list really. So it had to be bottom of the pile. So we've got jumping up a few places, but only up to 31. We've got Mishka and Grishka. They get a joint entry as per Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, because you never see one without the other. Just kind of bog standard henchmen for me. You know, they had the knife throwing act, but arguably didn't really add anything to the proceedings. And only a couple of places above that have gone with Gobinder at 29. Similar reasons. You've got the menacing presence, the physical stature, but nothing else really stand out. It's just you've got a warm body, basically. So not a great character, not really much character development. And then we've got arguably the two main antagonists of the piece. So I've gone with Kamal Khan at 23, just above Scaramanga. Clearly a villain, but doesn't really offer much in terms of villainous ways for me. Just he's kind of there. He's clearly a baddie, but nothing he does or nothing in his actions suggests that he's in any way evil or villainous. He's just kind of leader of the bad guys. It's a bit of a strange one really, because I think the role of the villains in this film don't necessarily match up with the overall tone. But my favourite villain of the bunch, but still only comes in at mid-table at 19, is General Orlov, just below T.H. Johnson from Live and Let Die, and just above Jaws from Moonraker. Much more aggressive, like I said earlier, so you know there's more of a physical presence and more of a what's the word I'm looking for? More clearly unhinged and dangerous, but still not a true arch enemy in the true sense of the word. So all of the villains kind of rank in the bottom half for me. Jay, how about you? How did you rank the 6 villains of the piece here?
I agree with a lot of the stuff that you said, Andy. So starting from reverse order, I've got Magda and Octopussy. I've put them in the last 2 places for exactly the reasons you said, but I've got a slight difference. So you've got Octopussy at number 38, and I put Octopussy at 37. It could have been either way, if I'm being honest. I did think about it. The only reason I put Octopussy in 37 was that she was the leader of the Octopussy gang. Even though Magda, she could look after herself, she was in the film more often. Just the fact is, Octopussy was the ringleader, a wealthy lady. So that's the only reason. But like I said, it could have gone in either way. Now, I agree. So it's interesting because Gobinder and Mishka and Grishka they're again, I think they've gone for quantity over substance in this film. So, you know, they've got quite a few baddies, villains in this film. Like you kind of said, none of them are really that intimidating, or you don't have any kind of megalomaniacs in there, like, you know, Blofeld, Goldfingers, or any true good henchmen like Red Grant or Oddjob, or, you know, Rosa Klebb. So it's a bit disappointing in terms of the quality of the villains. So Mishka and Grishka I've put in at 27 compared to your 31. And then Gobinder in at 26 compared to your 29. This is where we got a slight difference, but only ever so slightly. So I put in General Orlov in at 22 and Kamal Khan in at 20. Again, it's very close, but Orlov, he's obviously the main villain in terms of, because Kamal is working for Orlov. But like you said, like, you know, I pointed out at the beginning and you kind of said, you know, he's the petulant teenager. He's very stroppy, and he's not in it as much as Kamal. And I quite like Kamal, apart from Andy. I don't know what your view on this is. Kamal was obviously working for Octopussy, and he was obviously doing very well in terms of jewel smuggling, making lots of money. The whole business venture is working well. What does he gain by working with Olaf in terms of doing, the nuclear bomb in Germany? Because obviously he's doing financially very well, doing the whole jewel smuggling. I don't think that's really explained, is it? Why does he actually work for Olaf? Apart from maybe getting a big payday initially, surely having a nuclear war isn't going to increase smuggling of jewel profits, and obviously he's going against Octopussy. I don't know if you have a view on that.
No, it's an interesting point, and we could surmise that it's for money, because that is always a good reason, but it's never actually said. It's not even so much as implied. There's no reason given. It's just sort of stated as fact that this is what's happening, but for no logical or explained reason. So you're absolutely right on that. It seems like an alliance of convenience as opposed to one that would necessarily make sense.
Because Olaf obviously is doing it in terms of Mother Russia expanding their territory across Europe in terms of going across against NATO. But as soon as Kamal is working for Olaf, he's burning his bridges with Octopussy, and I just can't see what his end game is. So I know I'm digressing from my rankings, Andy. So I do put in Kamal just because he's in the film more. He does come across as the main villain in terms of his interaction with James Bond from the majority of the film. Olaf is obviously there in the background planning everything, and then he comes in the last quarter, doesn't he, in terms of kind of going against. And also Olaf dies, doesn't he? And Bond doesn't get to kill Olaf, does he? He's just shot down by the border guards, isn't he, at the train checkpoint? That's what you call it. Whereas
kind of a weak ending to him.
Yeah. So that's my ranking. So not too different from you, Andy, in terms of they're all lower half, but there's some slight subtle differences between where some of them might place. So moving on, Andy, in terms of our movies, obviously at the top of the show, we both stated what the rating is. Octopussy, I've given 6 out of 10, and that is the same as You Only Live Twice and Live and Let Die. So I've looked at that and I thought Octopussy. I do prefer Live and Let Die and You Only Live Twice to Octopussy. So I'll put Octopussy in at number 10 there. So I do think it's just not as good as Roger Moore's first entry. I know your Live and Let Die, you rate it really highly, whereas I've got it in a 6 out of 10. And in You Only Live Twice, even though it's one of Sean Connery's weaker entries, I still think it's better than Octopussy. What about you? Where did you put Octopussy in your 13?
So I also gave it 6 out of 10. And my other 6s at this stage are Thunderball, Dr. No, and You Only Live Twice. But I slightly preferred this to You Only Live Twice. So for that reason, it comes in at my number 9 slot. It's very difficult to differentiate when, I've got 4 with the same mark, but we're staying true to our word and we're not having any joint positions. Just slight edge Octopussy has over You Only Live Twice. And I think, if I'm honest, it could have been higher, and it could have even gone as high as 7 out of 10 in terms of a rating, but there were just a few too many silly moments for me. There was, I think we called it out at the start of the podcast when you were talking about what your wife said about it. There's a lot of realism. There's it's quite a gritty movie in places, but it's mixed in with a lot of silliness and a lot of things that take you out of the moment. So that kind of brings it down for me. So, but I do slightly prefer it to You Only Live Twice. So it's in at my number 9 slot. as things stand. Now, if we convert those ratings overall into ratings by actor, we go down the list of Roger Moore films, and so far he's been in 6. For me, it comes in at 4 out of 6. So it's one below The Spy Who Loved Me, which I gave 7 out of 10, and one above The Man with the Golden Gun, which I gave 5 out of 10. So, Jay, where does Octopussy sit in your Roger Moore specific list?
Yeah, so this is, I think this is just a coincidence. I know we touched on this last week in terms of Roger Moore films, where we do have differences, but the end total is the same. So I've actually put it in at 4th place as well, which is obviously what you've got. And is obviously last week we had the same total and the same average, and because this week we've both given it 6 out of 10, that's just carried over. So before we finish, the last one in terms of our rankings is Bond actors. So Andy, this film for me doesn't change anything in terms of Bond actor rankings. So Roger Moore remains at number 2 and Sean Connery is number 1. So there's no movement here. And to be fair, since Live and Let Die, Roger Moore has gone in at number 2 and he's stayed in at number 2. What about you? Has there been any change on that front for you?
No change from me. I think this one solidified his place as best of the rest behind Connery as things stand. You know, I mentioned previously that Moonraker was almost the tipping point for me, and if films had continued to go down the downward spiral they were on, then Roger Moore could have found himself going down the list. But he's come back strong in the last 2 films. This was, like I said, a solid effort and a good outing for Moore as Bond, so he stays in 2nd place for that reason. And so brings us to the end of another episode. We are over the halfway point now, 13 down, 12 to go, but only one more for Roger Moore, and he is in his 007th film next time round, A View to a Kill. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next week.
The Rating Room.
My name is Brittany, and this is the Status Alternative Podcast. On this podcast, I talk about a few pop culture topics like anime. Odd Taxi follows the story of Otakawa, a 41-year-old walrus taxi driver whose parents abandoned him in elementary school, leaving him generally asocial. Comics.
My earliest introduction to comics was when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and there was this library corner in the classroom while I was looking for a book to read or a book that caught my interest. I found Calvin and Hobbes.
Music, mostly hard rock and heavy metal.
The very first rock song that really got my attention and really made me want to become a fan of it would have to be the first time I heard Nirvana's Lithium.
And pro wrestling.
I really wish I was watching NXT and AEW right around 2019. Because I could have gotten a better grasp on what was going on at the beginning of this. I got it at the tail end.
So tune in every Thursday. Available wherever you listen to your podcast. And remember, stay alternative.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels. And be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.